Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Mark Wennick. I'm the Market Director of what we call Engineered Solutions here at TransTech Energy. That kind of means that I'm responsible for the business development activities and a lot of the technical support that goes in and around our bulk plants, such as terminals, large power generation projects, and essentially anything that requires a large scale of engineering support. And I'd like to ask Peter Swanger, our Director of Project Management, who's joining me this morning, to give a brief introduction of himself and his team.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mark. As you said, my name is Peter Swanger. I'm the Director of Project Management for the Energy Division, which includes all of our propane, butane, and engineered products. My team is responsible for design and executing the projects in the energy business unit, all the way from tanks and parts only, all the way to full-scale terminals.
Thanks, Peter. So as the title says, it's Beat the Freeze, propane storage planning, what you need to do right now. And during this, we'll do our best to walk you through, the activities that need to take place if you're considering adding storage this year, or even a potentially new project that you want to get implemented and have it operational before the end of the year, really to get the cash register rolling for the 2026 and early 27, business season. So again, realize that a lot of us are just heading into spring. I mean, last week here, it was barely 60 degrees and we're hitting 90 degrees today. And here we are kind of saying, beat the freeze. But as we walk through the activities that need to take place, you'll kind of see, that the timeline to have things operational by, let's say, October, November of this year is getting kind of tight. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of start talking about the outline of what we're going to cover today. And please also note, that at the end of the seminar, if there's things that we didn't cover, there'll be an opportunity for a question and answer period. So the first thing that we're going to do is going to be 5 separate areas. The first one is kind of a reality check, kind of where you are today, where other projects are today, what's needed to move forward, a compressed timeline. In other words, you're understanding that the window may be closing, so to speak, but it's still open. What can we do to support you to have a successful project? How TransTech works with yourselves or other customers on developing the budget and the scope, what's needed for engineering, permitting and procurement, and then construction activities, commissioning, and what the potential next steps are required in order for a successful project to happen for 2026. So I'm kind of, the title of this slide is where projects should be versus where they are. And essentially, with best case scenarios, projects that are targeting winter readiness, they should have already had their engineering and permitting either underway or complete, because, Peter will discuss a little bit later, is one of the things that we have no control over is, the permitting process, really, how long that could take from region to region or locality to locality. What can we do to support you on, the procurement of long lead equipment, such as tanks, compressors, meters. And, if you're still debating a new facility or adding storage, as mentioned a little earlier, the window's opening, but, it is beginning to close. So there's not an alarm, so to speak, but we definitely want to make you aware, that time is of the essence. You can definitely work with us, to develop that initial budget and scope. What can we do to work with your, key stakeholders and the decision makers? And one thing I definitely want to point out, the biggest risk in not being operational in 26 isn't just one item. It's the combination of multiple things, such as not having the proper drawings ready, not having a plot plan, the P&ID to support for fire safety analysis or the permits, budget uncertainty, not understanding, what the final number is going to be and how it's going to affect your business models, the scope, with multiple things going on a project at the same time. Who's going to be responsible for what? And the procurement path, understanding what's required, what the lead times are. Let's say new tanks versus used tanks, and whether or not a particular valve that may be required for the application is available, and how long that would take. Excuse me. So again, moving forward, that I'd ask Peter to kind of walk through the timeline and what's needed to compress it and make the project successful.
Yeah, so a little bit about the timeline here. Budget and scope is really what we should be looking at now. Mark will go into that a little bit detail of what all that entails, and then engineering and permitting is the item that possibly can decide if the project is this year or possibly later in the year, or in worst case early 27. We'll get into a lot of detail on that, because that is the opportunity that if we haven't started to be able to go in and start those connections with the authority having jurisdiction, start the relationship with them and make sure we have everything that we need. Procurement, we'll talk about some of the risks that we have, but a lot of them being related to tariffs and data centers with lead time of items that normally are stock that we possibly could be longer lead. And then construction is the making sure we have time to allocate the right resources to the job. Do we need excavation? Do we need electrical service? Do we need specialty contractors outside of a company like TransTech for piping and commissioning? And then everybody's favorite part, commissioning and getting the facility up and running.
Thanks, Peter. So, Peter mentioned, developing the budgetary proposal and scope definition. I think that's probably, from my standpoint, that's maybe one of the most important pieces, and it's truly critical, because once you have that budget and understand what the scope is, then it makes basically that becomes a roadmap for your project. And when you contact TransTech, you'll either speak with myself or one of our other business development managers. We have multiple folks with a lot of experience directly in the propane industry. We also can get support from Peter, and his team. And generally, we can turn around a solid budgetary proposal for you, along with a scope document, generally within a week. So that means if you call us today, next week we'll have a document to review with you, and then be able to work with yourselves and the decision makers within your organization to say, okay, what are the next paths? What are the next pieces? What's the path moving forward? Because again, scope clarity right now really drives every downstream step, whether it's new storage, expansion of an existing facility, or even a completely new bulk plant. And what we'll do is kind of work with you to set, let's say, a realistic deadline for budget approval. Because once that's done, then we can begin to move forward with engineering and support you on the permitting, and procurement of the long lead items can start moving. Because one thing we want to make sure is, make everyone aware, a lot of, let's say, clarity here is, the delays create cost exposure. And we'll mention tariffs a little bit more, but the realization is that, the tariff situation that we're seeing now is kind of, it creates some uncertainty on steel plate for new fabrication, and even components that go into U.S. assembled equipment. We're seeing tariff impacts on that. So I think that's something also to take into consideration. So once we have the scope and the budgets determined, we'll turn it over to Peter and his team. And then kind of, Peter can kind of go through what the next steps are, providing, let's say, the engineering deliverables. And another key component would be the fire safety analysis to help you move forward and get your permits for the facility.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. The engineering is obviously the start of any of these projects. What are we putting on site? We always like to start with a general arrangement and a PNID. The general arrangement shows the setbacks, the code setbacks, the requirements we have from buildings, from roadways, from public spaces, between bulkheads and tanks, and any of that information shows where our pumps are. And really that's used when we talk about on the next slide for permitting, to be able to tell the permit office or whatever permits are required to be able to say, what am I putting on my site and where is everything going to go and what is it going to look like? We'll follow that up with the PNID. That's usually more running towards the fire safety analysis, showing I have the right valves in the right spot to also be code. Both of those are very standard documents to be able to put a propane plant together, especially when we're trying to come in and do a repipe to add 1 tank of storage. We have to know where are we going to tie into, what valving are we going to put where? Are we trying to operate the tanks together? Are we trying to operate them individually? It's really let's confirm everything that you guys want is on the set of plans. After that, we get the FSA started. So the FSA is almost always an afterthought up until kind of late 2025, early 26, when a lot more permit offices are requiring to have the fire safety analysis up front and be able to review that as part of the permit process. So what an FSA is it's a self-conducted audit of the safety features of the propane installation, as well as a means to minimize the potential for a propane gas release from the storage containers during transfer operations. It also includes a brief evaluation of the capabilities of local emergency response team. So a majority of that in the past was check a bunch of boxes, submit it, and you're good. But now there's a lot more awareness on safety and awareness on if there is a leak, do we understand where it's coming from and how to stop it, and making sure the fire department can do so. So a lot of these changes happened around 2001, and they're just now getting in where almost every permit office that we talk to wants to see it up front. So this is an item that we want to make sure we do not wait to do towards the end. So as part of completing that, it's obviously follows up with the general arrangement in the PNID, making sure everything meets code, making sure everything is there, making sure all the valving is in the right configuration, et cetera. It's just kind of another really quick check, along with the safety document to be able to describe what's on the facility. Once that fire safety analysis is done, we do reach out to the fire department to get their response time, something called the Form 8, which is something that usually is the longest lead item to get, just based on who's on the facility. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about durations. But another big thing I'll also point out, we see this a lot. If anybody's adding anything to a facility, please make sure you update your fire safety analysis. Every time you add a tank, change valves, adjust locations of items, you need to make sure the fire safety analysis is updated. A lot of times it doesn't need a big update, but it is definitely a document that we want to make sure we have set up and ready. Going into permitting, kind of a great tie-in after the FSA. The fun part with permits is they're always different. Every state has kind of their own idea. Every city has their own idea of what they want, who's going to look at it, who's responsible. You'll hear us say AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. Who is that? In some states, it's the fire department. In some states, it's the building department. Some states, it's labor and industries. Some states, some states there's nobody. So it all depends. There are a couple states that have a very clear, very straightforward permit process and checklist. A couple of those, Texas, North Carolina, sometimes Massachusetts. It all just depends. Theirs is challenging, but they are clear on what they want. And obviously some states don't require state permits. If there's ever any question, please reach out. We'd be happy to assist trying to identify who the AHJ is, what the requirements are, and how do we get those permits. For the county and city permits, every city's different. It's just like state permits. The best option you have is reach out to the local government and just tell them kind of what you want to do. This is an opportunity that is really, really a big leg up of having that relationship with them, especially the local fire marshal, fire department, the state government, local government, county government, whoever you're governed by, to say, what do I want to build, and make sure that they're aware. Some of these, zoning comes in as well, but a lot of that, they'll really help if you're going to pick a specific plot of land, of making sure we have that preliminary approval before we spend a bunch of time and money to make sure we can put that facility where we want it on that property. I'm going to talk about one line on here. A lot of this does require the engineering drawings. The second line up here requires complete engineering and fire safety analysis. I did talk about it a little, but obviously want to just continue to say that over and over. We have to have some type of sketch drawing, and a lot of these offices are looking for a fire safety analysis. So make sure we get those started early will be the best we can do to make sure we beat the freeze for installations. And I'll hand this back over to Mark to talk about tanks.
Thanks, Peter. So a couple things here on procurement. New tanks and Transtech, we have our own fabrication facility located down in McGregor, Texas, which is not far from Waco. And whether it's, you utilize Transtech for fabrication or even, let's say, one of our competitors, we're seeing lead times on new tanks anywhere from 16, 20 weeks for standard 30,000s and even 60,000 gallon tanks. 90,000 gallon tanks, 120,000 gallon tanks, larger ones, which you would normally put in a terminal. Lead times on those are stretching out to 24 to 26 weeks. So again, when you look at this and looking at the storage that you want to have, if you're going new, it's really critical to make that decision as soon as possible so you can get your production window for your particular tank. The used and refurbished market, that's even tightening up just as much. Again, a lot of it is being driven by the oil and gas market and the midstream operators, as we're seeing additional production open up to meet U.S. energy demand. The need to capture the NGLs at these well sites is also increasing, and the most economical way for them to do that is with a used tank. And again, they're also seeing it. The advantage of that is that the tank is sitting there in inventory. It can be moved out to a location really quickly, and their production can start up ahead of schedule, which allows them to begin generating revenue from a particular site. One thing I would like to point out here, though, is that on any of the tanks that are out there in our inventory, we can also do R-stamp modifications and repairs to them. So if we have an older tank that is available for a particular project and it's old, it may not have the right openings in it to support today's higher capacity facilities, we have ASME certified welders that can add nozzles to it, make other modifications to those tanks. This way you'll get what's called, basically, it's an R-stamp piece. It'll have an additional data plate on there. It's approved by ASME, and that tank then essentially becomes as good as a brand new tank that comes right off the production line. Another piece to consider is the internal valves, emergency shutoff valves, the specialty valving that's used in bulk plants. With some consolidation of the manufacturers, they've moved, let's say, some of the fabrication equipment from one state. Some of it's going down to Mexico. It's kind of all over the place right now. And as they're rebuilding up their production and fabrication capabilities, some of the lead times on the valving, which used to be, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks, we're now seeing 18 and 20 weeks for internal valves also. So something else to keep in mind, we do try to keep inventory at our Rocky Mount fabrication facility. And the other piece is that we have because we are truly a coast-to-coast company, we have very solid relationships with all the equipment distributors across the country. And this way it allows us to take advantage, one, of our size, our geographic locations, and really kind of use those relationships to make sure that we can cut down on lead times on equipment. So if company A doesn't have it, we know that maybe B, C, or D may have that valve in stock. And I'd like to ask Peter to kind of talk about what he's seeing with electrical components and utility connections as far as, let's say, supply chain issues and potential constraints.
Yeah, for sure. The electrical components that we see the most, I don't know if I call them quite issues, just a little bit of concerns. VFDs, starters, any of the items that you'll see them also want to bring into a data center. We see a lot of stuff where manufacturers are shifting, obviously, with the demand. Data centers are taking a huge supply and demand of these components, just like we see in any of the computer chips kind of across the whole globe, really. We see a lot of companies kind of shifting towards components that cater to that industry based on the demand. So we see a little bit less of a supply of VFD starters, a little bit on the motors. They haven't really been a problem. But really here, the purpose is to just talk about what could be a potential that could impact the timeline of the project and what can we do about it. So a lot of this really is if we know we need to get electrical components, and I'll talk a little bit about if we don't have power on site on the next slide, but if I need to order or buy those components, the more lead time you give yourself, the better it's going to help, especially worrying about if there is a delay, you're not stressing about, is it going to come in time? Is my installer going to be available, et cetera? Once we have kind of that permit and everything set up, we should definitely go ahead and look at any of those electrical components we need and just make sure we can get them. And just like Mark said, we've got a handful of vendors we use on the East Coast, a handful on the West Coast, Texas, Center, all over the place. One of them, if not us, can find where our components are. It just comes back down to if I am expediting it, there possibly might be some costs associated with it. And the last item on the slide is tariff. Not just on pricing with tariffs. It's, again, another lead time kind of possibly issue. Mark talked a little bit about tanks where we see kind of extended lead time based on tariffs, whether it be related to tariff announcements and companies trying to restrict what items they import in the country to see just do the tariffs stick, do the tariffs change, just what's going on. So we've seen a lot of companies that import valve castings and other items that maybe just waited to see what happens. So the quantities in stock here in the States are a lot lower than what we've seen in a long time. And right as they're starting to get everything built back up over the past handful of months, then the data centers pick back up. So there's just such a demand for a lot of these components, not just for pricing, but also for lead time. Just making sure if we know we have big components, this isn't like a 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch valve kind of conversation. This is really, if we're looking at stuff that's bigger than it, that lead time can really be extended, that we want to just make sure as soon as we get through that permit setup and the drawings that we look at those major items and go ahead and get those on order so that we don't have an issue with them down the road. And then a little bit more on the utilities. We did talk about some of the kind of basic electronic components, VFD switches, et cetera. But if we don't have power on site, then what? It's usually not a problem to bring in power. We've seen a couple states that you kind of have to have everything done before they'll bring in power. We have some states that pulling in another meter and a power pole is actually really straightforward. We have some areas where maybe you don't have three phase available, and we're trying to bring in one phase and use a VFD or something, or a phase converter to try to get some of these higher end pumps to work. If we're looking at trying to bring that power in, I would always plan on 2 to 3 months of just time needed to make sure you get permits, because that's a whole nother wave of, you got to have utility permits, you got to have meters, you got to have et cetera. And then even their lead time to try to get power companies on site. You never know. If you're in a smaller area, maybe it's a lot quicker, and that's fantastic. But at least planning for kind of that 2 to 3 months, we can always get that started really early as well. So a lot of this is just get the plan together, engage in the contractors that we need to upfront and early, get the permits, and be able to get a lot of these long lead items started. Busy season for anybody who's been in the industry for a while is always fall going into winter. So fall is a time when schedules are filling up with a lot of the specialty contractors. And even then, if you're in an area that's really cold, everybody's trying to do construction before winter. So, do yourself a favor as well and look at who you might need and go ahead and start those conversations and try to get something on the schedule. So that way you're going to be a priority when it comes down to fall and early winter to be able to get your equipment installed. And then everybody's favorite part. Everybody loves startup and commissioning. This is the time that honestly makes or breaks the job. When you fill that tank, does it leak? And we always want the installer on site to make sure there are no leaks. You want to fill it that first time, do all of your leak checks, do all your commissioning, do everything all at the same time before you fill it with liquid to make sure that there's no problems. Transec always prides ourselves of saying we're going to go leak check it. We leak check 2 or 3 times on a lot of our installations while we're filling. We check it after a handful of hours. We tell the customer to go in and check it. We want to make sure there are no leaks. Any leaks mean you got to shut the plant down, fix them. You're losing product. It's very dangerous. We want to make sure during commissioning there are no leaks. We like couple days on the schedule here, but it all depends on who do we need on site? Do I need permit sign-offs? How many permit sign-offs? Do I have to submit documentation to the office, such as pressure tests? Do we need excavation reports? Making sure we get all that stuff aligned here before we come in and do startup and commissioning. One last item. We obviously want to make sure everybody's confident for the whole winter. The last thing anybody wants is anything during winter when all your customers are really relying on you to be able to bring that product to their house. So do not skip out on the commissioning. It is a very short process to be able to get it all done. We just got to make sure we have that leak check in place.
Thanks, Peter. And just wanted to add 2 points to the commissioning piece. The first one is, our crews will make sure, that your team is, trained on the operation of the facility, and even in some cases, we'll bring in the first responders and walk them through it, let them understand where the emergency shutoff valves are, how everything operates, why the relief valves are there, where the correct position is to have the emergency shutoff stations. And then the other piece is, making sure that bobtails are filling or transports are filling, they can unload properly. So, it's truly a holistic piece during the commissioning phase of a project that, again, we kind of talked about it, internally. It's like when you buy a new car, you get the keys handed to you, that salesperson should make sure that all the features of that car. So again, critical piece, as Peter said, sometimes not the most favorite piece, but it's definitely critical to have, smooth operation. So we're kind of, again, we're May 26th. Hopefully if you're making considering doing something, this is kind of really the time to make a decision. So if you just look at a standard bulk plant, we can get things operational by the end of 26. It's definitely possible. As Peter talked about, a lot of the steps that are required from engineering and, permitting, doing the FSA, it's there. The window of opportunity isn't going to remain open too much longer, but it's still open, and we'll do whatever we can to put a book or put a rock under the window to keep it from slamming down so you can be working this year. If you already have started the permitting process and you think you're close, there's some fast track options to move forward, whether it's a modular package or a skid mounted solution. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's truly maybe the fastest path to get you in a potential, let's say, client for an industrial application operational. If the decision to move forward kind of starts slipping into July, August, those projects, there is some jeopardy there of having them operational by, the end of this year. And there's also the potential for higher costs, not only due to tariffs, but the realization is that you now have construction activities that are taking place during winter and inclement weather, whether, again, the crews don't have as much daylight to work under. May have to bring in portable heaters and things like that. So again, those are all additional costs that need to be taken into consideration on winter projects. So really want to kind of make, the key point here is the time to make a decision on whether it's, adding storage or building a net new facility. It's now. Longer waiting, kind of, reduces, optionality. Whether the availability of tanks may not be as great as it is now. The scope of the project, instead of adding all the storage that you want to get things moving, you may have to build half now and build half later in 2027. But again, we'll do everything we can to support you to move the project forward. And kind of want to take, the next piece and kind of look, what are the risks and what are some mitigation strategies to help you and what we can do to support you. So we really believe right now, and Peter talked about it, the highest impact, the biggest risk piece right now is permitting delays. There's nothing that you can really do to expedite that. That you can have all your documentation in place. The FSA can be absolutely golden. However, if the permitting office is like, we have a 3-month wait, we have a 4-month wait, or you need to have a hearing for whether it's, a potential zoning change, there's nothing you can do about that. So the sooner you can get in front of the authorities at this point, the better off you are. Equipment lead times, they're manageable, but again, they do require some early ordering, and tank sourcing at this point is definitely critical, not only just because of the activities that we're seeing in the propane industry, but as I mentioned earlier, the midstream and oil and gas activity right now is definitely heating up. Electrical service constraints, again, that can definitely be, let's say, addressed by engaging the local utilities now, getting on their radar, understanding what their lead times are. Do they have to bring in a new pole? Do they have to bring in another transformer? Whatever it is, kind of understand what that procedure is with a local utility. And again, we can support you on those conversations. Potential cost escalations, that can be mitigated through, early pricing commitments and supplier agreements. Contractor availability, the sooner you can get a contract in place, the better off you are. We have multiple field crews, and we know how to kind of, scale up to really support multiple time sensitive projects. So, for us, we look at it, we have crews based across the United States, and if need be, for larger projects, if we have to bring in subcontractors to work under the supervision of our people to get a project moving, that's something that we'll do also. And kind of want to take another look, and I mentioned skid solutions, and I think they're not for every application, but I do think they provide some flexibility for, let's say, compressed timeline projects, and also even some, let's say, industrial applications also. So, people have, seen skid tanks or a modular or a plant in the box. There's kind of, different ways to package it and look at it. And what essentially it is, that we'll take an ASME storage tank, we'll put it on a structural steel skid, and on that skid, the transfer pump, the truck offloading bulkhead, the truck loading bulkhead, if the project requires metering, everything is pre-built in we'll call it a factory. It's our fabrication facility down in Rocky Mount. It gets pressure tested. All the electrical components are tested, and then it gets basically, it's delivered right to your site, ready to go. The only thing that has to get done is run electric to it and commission it. The other option with something like this is we can take it, we can break the components apart and do all skid mounted components. So the truck offloading bulkhead is put on a skid, truck loading bulkhead is put on a skid, the pump is put on a skid. All of that is fabricated in our shop. The tank is set on piers the way you would typically see. And now we just need to field fit some short pieces of pipe to tie everything together. The advantage, again, with that is it requires, minimal field time. All the components are fabricated in a climate controlled environment. And again, you're operational quicker once our team gets in place. Also want to point out on skid mounted solutions, if you're looking at if you have a leased piece of property, it gives you a lot of advantages here. Again, you can drop it off. The site does not need a lot of work where you're doing any, let's say, long-term improvements. You just, if it's a temporary solution for you, the code allows you to use a compacted crushed stone base. If it's going to be there longer than a year, code requires it to be set on a concrete slab. Again, those solutions that we can provide the drawings for a concrete contractor, or we can subcontract that out for you and include it as part of our total package. We also usually keep skid mounted tanks, in our inventory. So if you have a short-term application where you only need to lease it, let's say for 6 months or a year, that's also another option. It allows you to minimize your capital expense and just basically have an operational expense for that period of time, and again, gets you operational. Or if you have a industrial client that only needs bulk storage for a short period of time, whether doing a plant shutdown or some maintenance, that's another solution for you. And with that, I really kind of want to, excuse me, kind of talk about, what our next steps are. So right now, I think we really need to take a look at, finalizing the scope and budget, confirm what your storage volume really needs to be to support what your business activities are going to be. Final site surveys, what's the project type, and then, work with us to develop that budgetary estimate. I think, the earlier you can engage TransTech so we can get the engineering resources allocated to your project, work with you on project planning and some procurement strategies. Again, earlier we can start that, the more likelihood we have of supporting you to get a successful project. Get the fire safety analysis started in parallel with engineering, and get that, the permitting process started as soon as possible. Understand exactly what you need, and then this way, when you move forward and you have, let's say, what you believe to be the correct drawings, you know that everything that you have that required to get your permit is already in place. Need be begin to get the, let's say, long lead items on order, secure a tank. I think, again, that's the biggest piece because everything gets built out around the tank, and discuss things, what the electrical components are, what the valving is going to need. And I think, again, the biggest piece I really want to kind of, stress here is that TransTech, with our, staff and resources, we're here to support you from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. If you even just want to have, that initial conversation to kind of, go into detail about what you're thinking of doing, we can really, work with you to pencil out a serious plan to get things for you to be successful. And with that, want to kind of, open the floor up to questions. If we don't have time to answer everyone, you see Peter's email and my email down here. You can email your questions in and we will respond to everybody. But again, want to take the time right now to see if anybody has any questions. If I said anything that wasn't clear, that Peter did, although Peter, I think, did a fantastic job of explaining all the steps. But again, please feel free to ask some questions. All right, we have one that popped up. What happens if construction starts in the winter and it snows and freezes? So I can start in that, and Peter, feel free to jump in. So essentially for us, our guys work in the snow, sleet, freezing rain, and I forget the whole mailman motto, but it's kind of, the same thing. Just, as a quick bit of history for you all, we did a rail terminal project up in Vermont. It was supposed to have started in September, but there were some permitting issues, and we weren't able to start until towards the end of October, almost November. And November, December in Vermont, it got cold, it rained, it snowed, and our guys worked through, basically through the winter. And with snow on the ground and sleet, they were moving gas before Christmas. And that was installation of 360,000 gallon tanks, 5 rail towers, and 2 transport loading positions. So again, there's times when, we don't have any control of the weather, obviously, but we will do what we can. We bring in, tents with heaters. So this way the guys are welding in a little bit, let's say, without the snow coming down on them, and a little bit warmer. But again, we figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, and 1 or 2 things to add. I mean, obviously, it's moving snow is a little bit of a problem, right? If you leave any of your equipment outside, it snows 2 feet, you can't find it. So we if we're in an area where we do think it's going to snow, we almost always have a skid steer or something to be able to move snow around. We put our parts in containers to make sure we know where they are. That keeps them safe from the snow, sleet, ice, anything like that. And then Mark did hint a little bit about tents. Tents and heating is really what that solution is. It does take longer. So the one thing that I would add to that is if you are stuck, unfortunately, having to do your project in the dead of winter, it will take a little bit longer to be able to do it because you do have to make sure you preheat some of the steel to make sure all your welds are good.
Looks like you build, and again, this is the first time we're using this platform, so I don't know if the audience can see the questions, so I'll read it out. It looks like you build a lot of big plants. Do you also build small bulk plants and do repair work? So yes to all three. We do build a lot of big stuff. We've done everything from 24 90,000 gallon tanks for a processing and export facility down in Texas, to we've even done some small power generation projects where it was a 500 gallon tank attached to a small vaporizer to support a propane fuel generator. So on the motto, we kind of say, there's no project that's too big or too small for us. We realize that our clients, they have their bulk plants, and some of the things that they get involved with require much smaller scale storage. So again, we'll figure out and work with this. Okay, is this a project that makes sense to bring Transtech in, or isn't a good fit? But I would say there really isn't anything that's too small for us. And doing repair work, without a doubt, our guys, in some cases, because let's say it was an emergency, have jumped on a plane and flown to, well, this wasn't bad work for them, but they had to, fly to the Bahamas to go work on a vaporizer. So again, we typically do that. We also have preventive maintenance plans. So if we build a facility for you, as part of it, we can provide a maintenance plan where we come out once or twice a year, check the entire facility, test the pumps, do the pump repairs out in the field, compressor repairs out in the field, things like that. So again, we truly are a turnkey solution for you from concept all the way through execution. How long does it take to perform a fire safety analysis? Peter, could you answer that one?
I'll take that one. Yes. We like to plan 3 to 4 weeks, with the majority of that really being there's one form in there called the Form 8. I talked about it a little bit earlier, which is where we submit to the fire department to get their response time. We've seen it in 4 days, but that's really the exception. A majority of projects are kind of in a zoning area that usually have a volunteer fire department. And sometimes they have better things to do out fighting fires, or possibly may not even be in the office. They may not have a full-time staff person who's available to answer those questions. So sometimes it takes a long time to find the right person, to find that contact. And sometimes we even have to go see them in person to say, hey, can you please help me out with this? Once we get in touch with them, it's usually a handful of days. It's making that first initial contact. Is usually where a majority of the lead time is driven. So if we're able to get that really quickly, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, but we usually like to plan 3 to 4 to be able to complete a fire safety analysis.
Thanks, Peter. If I purchase the tank myself, can you still do the engineering and installation? Yes. That's an easy answer. We've done that several times for clients. In fact, I'm providing a quote, working on a quote this morning, where they have 3 tanks from a facility that let's say we'll call them underutilized assets that they want to move over, and we'll do the design for them. And also to build on that, we can provide inspections on your tanks, and also again, if they're older tanks and they don't have the openings, let's say, that are necessary to support the project, our guys, again, these are Transtech employees, will do the engineering that's required, the fabrication, and then coordinate and bring in the required inspectors and handle the inspection and testing in order to do that those modifications to the tank based on ASME code. Realistically, if I call today, how long would it be to get a proposal, sign a contract, and have my plant installed? So I'll take parts 1 and 2. Now I'm going to throw the tough one over at Peter. So if you call this today, I would say we could get a budgetary proposal over to you within 5 business days. If it's, is there a chance we could get it done quicker? Without a doubt. But give us 5 days and then a couple of extra days to go through a project review with you, make sure, that everyone's in agreement on the scope, who's going to be responsible for what, et cetera. So I would say give us 5 days for the budgetary, another, potentially 2 to 3 days for project review and scope clarity, and then, sign the contract. And then we would turn it over to Peter and his team to get the engineering started if that's required. And also then you assign the construction timeline for that. So Peter, you can kind of go through the next piece of that. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's getting everything installed. I don't want to call as a little bit of a loaded question. It all depends on what the scope is. If we're looking at, we'll call it something, maybe agriculture, you're doing a grain dryer, you're doing a chicken farm or something that's very, very straightforward. If we have capacity, we'll put it in the schedule. We've seen a couple that we've had first contact to completion in kind of 8 weeks. I would consider that fast. And a lot of it's really just scheduling capacity and making sure we have permits. A lot of it's really going to be driven by permits. So we like to usually say after we receive permits, when can we be able to get on site and be complete? And I would like to say in most cases, it is a 4 to 6, 4 to 8 week window to be able to get that done. But again, kind of the whole point of the conversation here is, beating the freeze. The earlier we get in, the earlier we can lock in kind of that ideal time window of being able to complete that job.
Thanks for the question. If I have a tank without a data plate, can it be used? Well, it depends. If the tank you have is already in service, it can remain in service without, again, the local authority may have a different opinion of that, but the code right now indicates that if the tank doesn't have a data plate, you can still utilize it as long as it's been continuously in propane service. If the tank is taken out of service and you want to move it, there's a good chance then there's a few extra steps that go into play. One, you have to do an API inspection on it to verify the material thickness or the welds intact. Is there any pitting or corrosion, et cetera? So there's definitely a process there. Can it be used? Yes, but you have to get approval from the local authority, and there's also an inspection process that has to take place. Emergency services such as leak repair, realistically, what is your lead time? Peter, this is right up your alley.
Yeah, lead time emergencies we always call totally different. We'll reschedule for true emergencies, such as big leaks, major downs, facility shutdowns for either customers, potential customers, et cetera. You're running compressors in a terminal and they go down. That would be something we would consider an emergency. We do everything we can to try to be able to have somebody on site within 7 days. What we can do is provide a lot of remote support. We can help identify what the problem is, trying to make it where if I need parts, I can get them up front. We do have additional emergency, depending on what the timelines are, we are always upfront with all of our customers. If it's a time where we know we are overcommitted and we can't do it, we'll tell you exactly up front, hey, here's what the lead time is to be able to get somebody on site. But in most lease repairs, we do everything we can to have somebody close. With our crews spread across the country, we're usually not more than a day's travel away from just about any place in the country to be able to get to an emergency repair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh. Do you also manufacture or repair mercaptan skids? Yes. So we've done that work before, and I'm not proud of it, but I helped do commissioning on a mercaptan skid once, and it leaked. And let's say that was a pile of clothes that got thrown away. My wife wasn't happy that I drove home in a car stinking of mercaptan. But yes, that's something we can also provide. There, again, if you want to, reach out to us, there's certain information that we need in order to be able to properly size it. And what I mean by size is, the storage tank, how much mercaptan needs to be kept on site, the flow rate of the product that's going through. In other words, we're looking at a project for, they're going to be accepting propane by pipeline. And again, understanding, that's 2,500 gallons a minute. So the pumps that are used to inject the mercaptan for that are going to be substantially different than, let's say, you're loading, transports at 600 gallons a minute. Again, so long way of saying yes, we do it, but again, there's certain things that go into each skid to make sure that it's the solution that we're providing meets your application. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I don't see any popping up, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but definitely appreciated the questions that did come through. On behalf of TransTech and also Peter too, definitely thank you for taking the time this morning. I realize, the joke is, if it's an in-person thing, we were the last ones between you and lunch. And again, definitely appreciate it. You have any questions, any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Even, if you're considering putting in a facility this year or doing an expansion or a repair, give us a call, even if it's just looking at some budgetary numbers, it's the stuff that we do. We'll turn it around for you, really quickly, and use that, let's say, that as a guide to say, what is it that you really want to do? What are the, at the end, essentially, I guess the best way to describe it is, what's your end game? Do you need to just add storage to help, mitigate, let's say, potential supply chain interruptions for LPG? Or are you looking at a net new facility? And then we can even kind of, work with you to determine what are the components of that's needed, how much storage should you really have. If you have industrial clients that have, that require, let's say, vaporization, what size tank makes sense for that? Is it a straight propane system, or do they have pipeline natural gas and they may need a synthetic natural gas system? Those are things so that we can also support you with, again, not only, let's say, basically to help you build your gallons and support your business and support your growth. So again, thank you everybody for the time. I truly hope you found the time with us valuable. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. Definitely invite you to visit our website. If you ever want to visit any of our facilities, let us know. Our fabrication shop in McGregor, Texas is really cool to see. When you see, just exactly how they build the tanks, it's definitely something to check out. So again, thank you everybody, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.